The bet that changed everything. The casino was alive with flashing lights, strange alien music, and the constant hum of excitement. Beings from every corner of the galaxy filled the place, their colorful forms crowding around gambling tables, slot machines, and glowing drink bars. Jack sat at the corner of a table, his human frame looking small compared to the towering aliens around him. He was tired, broke, and desperate. Jack wasn't supposed to be here. He had come to this distant planet for a quick job, a simple delivery. But curiosity and greed had led him into the heart of the casino, where he thought he could win big and leave richer than ever. Instead, he had lost almost everything he had. His last few credits clinked in his pocket, taunting him. A loud cheer erupted from a nearby table as an alien with 6 arms celebrated a big win. Jack stared at his cards, his heart sinking. This hand was no good. He folded, shaking his head. "This isn't my night," he muttered to himself. Just as he was about to leave, a voice stopped him. Leaving already, human? Jack turned to see a tall, reptilian alien with glowing red eyes and sharp teeth. The alien's scales shimmered under the casino lights, and his smile sent a chill down Jack's spine. The alien introduced himself as Crocs, a name that carried weight in the room. Crocs was a known figure in the underworld, a powerful and dangerous alien who owned half the casino. "You look like a man who needs a change of luck," Crocs said, his voice smooth yet menacing. Jack hesitated. "I've had enough for tonight." But Crocs leaned closer, his grin widening. "What if I told you I have a bet that could turn your night around? One big win, and you walk out a king." Jack knew better than to trust someone like Crocs, but desperation clouded his judgment. What kind of bet? Crocs snapped his fingers, and 2 of his goons dragged a young alien girl into the room. She was unlike anyone Jack had ever seen. Her skin glowed faintly blue, her silver hair shimmering like starlight. Her bright eyes held a mix of fear and defiance. She wore a strange collar around her neck, and Jack instantly knew she was a prisoner. "This," Crocs said, gesturing at the girl. "She's worth more than any amount of credits in this room. A rare prize, human. Win the bet, and she's yours." Jack frowned. "She's not an object. What kind of game is this?" Crocs laughed, his sharp teeth glinting. "Oh, don't be so noble. You're in a casino, not a temple. The game is simple. 1 round of galactic poker. Win, and she's yours. Lose, and you owe me everything you've got, including your ship." Jack's heart pounded. He didn't want to gamble on someone's life, but he couldn't walk away either. He glanced at the girl, who looked at him with silent desperation. Her eyes seemed to plead, "Don't leave me." Against his better judgment, Jack nodded. "Deal me in." The crowd around them grew silent as the cards were dealt. Crocs leaned back, confident and smug. Jack's hands trembled as he picked up his cards. His heart sank. It wasn't a strong hand. Crocs chuckled. "Bad luck already, human." Jack took a deep breath. He needed to play smart. He watched Crocs's every move, looking for a tell, a sign of bluffing. Crocs's confidence didn't waver, but Jack noticed something. A twitch in Crocs's left claw every time he glanced at his cards. Jack decided to bet everything he had. "All in," he said, pushing his last credits into the center of the table. The crowd gasped. Crocs grinned wider. "Bold move, human. Let's see if it pays off." He revealed his cards. A strong hand, but not unbeatable. Jack's heart raced as he revealed his own hand. It was just enough to win. The room erupted in cheers and gasps. Crocs's grin disappeared, replaced by a dangerous scowl. Jack exhaled in relief, barely believing his luck. Crocs stood, his massive frame towering over Jack. "You've won the game," he growled, his voice low and threatening. "But you don't know what you've gotten yourself into." The girl was released from her bonds and stepped beside Jack. Her glowing eyes met his, and for the first time, she smiled faintly. "Thank you," she whispered. But Jack's relief was short-lived. Crocs leaned closer, his red eyes burning with fury. "This isn't over, human. She belongs to me. And I'll come for her. And when I do, I'll make you regret crossing me." As Crocs stormed away, Jack realized he had just made a powerful enemy. He glanced at the girl, who stood silently by his side. She wasn't just a prize. She was someone who needed help. And now, they were both in danger. The casino lights seemed dimmer as Jack led her out into the chaotic streets of the alien city. He didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was clear. His life had just changed forever. Unraveling the mystery. The city was alive with chaos, but Jack felt like he had stepped into a storm he couldn't escape. The neon-lit streets of the alien world were a swirling mess of glowing signs, strange creatures, and constant noise. Beside him, the alien girl walked silently, her glowing blue skin a stark contrast to the dark alleys they ducked into. Jack glanced at her again, his curiosity burning. "You got a name?" She hesitated, her silver hair falling over her face. "Alara," she finally said in a voice soft as a whisper. "Alara, huh?" Jack muttered. "So, what's your story? Why did Crocs want you so badly?" Alara stopped walking and turned to face him. Her glowing eyes, sharp and piercing, met his. "You don't understand what you've done, do you?" Jack frowned. "I won you, didn't I? Got you out of that monster's claws." She shook her head, frustration flashing in her expression. "Crocs isn't just any alien. He's one of the most powerful crime lords in the galaxy. He doesn't lose, especially not to some random human gambler." Jack felt a chill creep up his spine. He knew Crocs was dangerous, but hearing it from Alara made it real. "Why you? What's so special about you?" Alara hesitated again, her gaze darting to the shadows around them. "I'm different," she said carefully, "and people like Crocs want to control things they don't understand." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" She sighed and held up her hand. At first, nothing happened, but then a faint light began to form. A soft, glowing energy pulsed in her palm, bright enough to light up the alley. Jack stepped back, his eyes wide. "You can do that?" he stammered. Alara closed her hand, and the light vanished. "I don't know where it comes from," she admitted, "but Crocs saw it as a weapon. He kept me captive, forcing me to use it for him." Jack's mind raced. This wasn't just some girl. She was something far beyond anything he'd ever seen. "So you're like a super weapon or something?" She shook her head, her expression pained. "I don't want to hurt anyone. I just want to be free." Jack felt a pang of guilt. He had thought he was saving her, but now he realized he had dragged himself into something much bigger. "All right, Alara," he said. "We'll figure this out. First, we need to get somewhere safe." But before she could respond, a loud crash echoed from the street behind them. Jack spun around, his heart pounding. From the shadows, 3 figures emerged, their hulking forms unmistakable. Crocs's goons. "Guess he didn't waste any time," Jack muttered under his breath. The leader of the group, a massive alien with tusks and glowing red armor, stepped forward. "Crocs says you got something of his," he growled, pointing a thick, clawed finger at Alara. "Hand her over, and maybe he'll let you live." Jack clenched his fists. "Tell Crocs to go rot." The goons didn't wait for another word. They lunged, their weapons sparking to life. Jack grabbed Alara's arm and pulled her into a run. "Move," he shouted. The chase was frantic. The narrow alleys of the city turned into a maze, with Jack and Alara weaving through crowds of aliens and jumping over obstacles. Behind them, the goons roared, their heavy footsteps shaking the ground. As they rounded a corner, Jack spotted a marketplace packed with stalls and traders. "This way," he said, diving into the chaos. The noise and confusion gave them a few precious seconds to hide. They ducked behind a stall filled with glowing orbs, panting heavily. Alara looked at Jack, her fear evident. "We can't keep running forever," she said. Jack nodded, his mind racing. "Then we'll stop running. But first, we need a plan." Alara hesitated, then reached into a pouch on her belt. She pulled out a small device, no bigger than a coin. "This might help," she said, handing it to Jack. "What is it?" he asked, turning it over in his hand. "It's a map," Alara explained. "Not just any map. A map to something Crocs has been after for years. A treasure hidden in the Outer Rim. If we find it, we might have a way to bargain with him, or buy our freedom." Jack stared at her. "A treasure? Are you serious? You've been carrying this around the whole time." She nodded. "It's the only leverage I have. But it's dangerous. Crocs will stop at nothing to get it." Before Jack could respond, the sound of heavy footsteps drew closer. The goons were searching the marketplace, pushing through the crowd. Jack tucked the device into his pocket and grabbed Alara's hand. "All right," he said. "We go after this treasure. But first, we survive the night." Alara gave a small, determined nod. Together, they slipped deeper into the shadows. The hunt for answers and survival just beginning. The chase begins. The neon glow of the alien city flickered above Jack and Alara as they darted through narrow streets, their footsteps echoing off the metallic walls. The air smelled of burning plasma and fried street food, a strange combination that barely registered in Jack's mind. Behind them, the unmistakable sound of blasters charging filled the air. "They're getting closer," Alara shouted, her voice laced with panic. Jack glanced over his shoulder. Crocs' thugs, 3 hulking brutes armed to the teeth, were closing in fast. The leader, a horned alien with glowing red eyes, barked orders in a guttural language Jack didn't understand. He didn't need a translator to know they were out for blood. "This way." Jack yanked Alara into a side alley, nearly tripping over a pile of discarded tech parts. They skidded to a stop in front of a towering wall. Jack cursed under his breath. "A dead end. Really?" Alara glared at him, her glowing blue eyes narrowing. Jack raised his hands defensively. "Hey, I didn't build the city." The sound of footsteps grew louder. The thugs were close, their shadowy figures just visible at the alley's entrance. Jack's mind raced. He spotted a rusted ladder bolted to the wall, leading to the rooftops. "Climb," he said, boosting Alara up. She hesitated for a moment, then grabbed the ladder and began to ascend. Jack followed, his hands slipping on the corroded metal. Below them, the thugs reached the alley, their red eyes glowing like embers in the dark. "There they are." One of them snarled, raising a blaster. Jack felt the heat of a laser bolt whiz past his ear. "Move faster," he yelled, pushing Alara upward. They reached the rooftop just as another bolt exploded against the wall, sending shards of metal flying. Jack pulled himself up and rolled onto the flat surface, panting heavily. Alara crouched nearby, her silver hair shimmering in the dim light. "What now?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jack scanned the horizon. The rooftops were a maze of pipes, vents, and glowing signs. In the distance, he spotted a faint beacon of light, a landing pad. "There," he said, pointing. "We get to that pad, find a ship, and get off this rock." Alara gave him a skeptical look. "And what happens when we run out of places to run?" Jack hesitated. He didn't have an answer, but he wasn't about to admit it. "One problem at a time, all right. Let's go." They began moving across the rooftops, hopping over gaps and dodging low-hanging cables. The city stretched out beneath them, a sea of glowing lights and endless noise. The thugs weren't far behind. Jack could hear their heavy boots thudding against the metal as they climbed after them. "You humans are persistent," the leader growled, his voice carrying over the wind. "But you're not going to win this time." Jack gritted his teeth. "Yeah, well, persistence is kind of our thing." They reached a wide gap between 2 rooftops. Jack stopped short, staring at the drop below. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered. Alara looked at him, then at the gap. "We can't stop now." Jack sighed. "Fine. But if I die, I'm haunting you." He took a few steps back, then sprinted forward and leaped. For a moment, he was weightless, the city below rushing past in a blur. He landed hard on the other side, his knees buckling. "Your turn," he called out. Alara hesitated, then jumped. She landed gracefully beside him, her glowing skin casting faint light on the rooftop. "That wasn't so bad," she said, brushing herself off. "Speak for yourself," Jack muttered, rubbing his knees. Before they could catch their breath, the thugs appeared on the opposite rooftop. The leader smirked, his glowing eyes narrowing. "End of the line," he said, raising his blaster. Alara stepped forward, her hands glowing faintly. Jack grabbed her arm. "What are you doing?" She looked at him, determination shining in her eyes. "I'm not running anymore." The air around her seemed to hum as she raised her hands. A burst of energy shot from her palms, slamming into the rooftop the thugs stood on. The structure groaned and buckled before collapsing in a cloud of dust and sparks. Jack stared at her, his jaw hanging open. "Remind me never to make you mad." Alara smirked, but her glow dimmed, and she swayed on her feet. Jack caught her before she fell. "Easy," he said, steadying her. "Let's not blow up the whole city, all right?" She nodded weakly, leaning against him. "I'll try." They continued toward the landing pad, moving as quickly as they could. When they finally reached it, Jack spotted a small beat-up ship sitting at the edge. "Think you can fly that?" Alara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack grinned. "If it's got an engine, I can fly it." As they boarded the ship, the sound of sirens filled the air. Crocs wasn't giving up, and Jack knew this was only the beginning. "Buckle up," he said, starting the engine. "Things are about to get bumpy." The ship lifted off, its thrusters roaring to life. As they soared into the sky, Alara looked out the window, her glowing eyes reflecting the stars. "Thank you," she said softly. Jack glanced at her, then back at the controls. "Don't thank me yet. We're not out of this mess." An uneasy alliance. The underground safe house was a hidden gem in the sprawling chaos of the alien city. Jack hadn't expected much when Rick, his old friend, led them through a maze of tunnels and into what looked like a junkyard. But as the doors hissed open, the sight of a high-tech workshop made his eyebrows rise. "Welcome to my humble abode," Rick said with a toothy grin, his 4 arms gesturing toward the cluttered room. Sparks flew from a half-assembled droid in the corner, and shelves were stacked with alien tech that Jack couldn't even begin to name. "This is where you bring us?" Jack asked, glancing at Alara, who stood silently beside him, her glowing blue skin casting a faint light. Rick shrugged. "You needed a place to lay low, and I needed someone desperate enough to owe me a favor. Seems like a fair trade." Jack frowned. He didn't trust Rick. The scrappy, bug-eyed alien had a knack for double-dealing. But right now, they had no other options. "We just need a ship," Jack said. "Something fast and off the radar." Rick tilted his head, his antennas twitching. "Ships don't come cheap, Jack, and after that stunt you pulled at Crox's casino, you've got a bounty bigger than a planetary moon." Jack sighed. "Figures. What do you want?" Rick grinned, his sharp teeth gleaming. "There's an asteroid field not far from here. Inside one of those rocks is an energy crystal I've been after for years. You get me that crystal, I'll get you a ship." Jack glanced at Alara. "Sounds simple enough." "It's not," Rick said, his grin fading. "The asteroid field is crawling with scavengers, bounty hunters, and, oh yeah, Crox's goons. You'll be walking into a death trap." Jack crossed his arms. "If it's so dangerous, why don't you get it yourself?" "Because I'm not stupid," Rick replied, tapping his head. "But you're desperate. Big difference." Alara, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. "We'll do it," she said firmly. Jack blinked. "We will." She looked at him, her glowing eyes steady. "We don't have a choice, Jack. If we stay here, Crocs will find us. We need that ship." Rick chuckled. "I like her. She's got more sense than you." Jack shot him a glare but didn't argue. "Fine," he said. "We'll get your crystal, but if you double-cross us—" "I wouldn't dream of it," Rick said, his grin returning. The journey to the asteroid field was tense. The borrowed speeder hummed as Jack piloted it through the dark, empty expanse of space. Alara sat beside him, her hands glowing faintly as she stared out the window. "You've been quiet," Jack said after a while. "I'm thinking," she replied, her voice soft. "About what?" She hesitated, then said, "About what happens after this. Even if we get the ship, Crocs won't stop hunting us. He's relentless." Jack frowned. "Then we make sure he can't hunt us. We find a way to take him down." Alara looked at him, her glowing eyes filled with doubt. "You make it sound so easy." "It's not," Jack admitted. "But we'll figure it out, one step at a time." They reached the asteroid field soon after. The massive rocks floated silently in the void, their jagged surfaces reflecting faint starlight. Jack maneuvered the speeder carefully, dodging smaller debris as they scanned for the crystal. "There," Alara said, pointing to a large asteroid with a strange, pulsing glow. Jack brought the speeder closer and landed on a flat surface. The moment they stepped out, the silence of space was replaced by a low hum. The glow from the asteroid's core lit up the jagged terrain around them. "Stay close," Jack said, his hand resting on the blaster at his side. They made their way toward the source of the glow, the air around them growing warmer with every step. The crystal was embedded in the rock, its light pulsing like a heartbeat. "There it is," Alara said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack approached it cautiously. "Let's grab it and get out of here." As he reached for the crystal, a loud clank echoed behind them. Jack spun around, his blaster drawn. 3 scavengers emerged from the shadows, their armor pieced together from scraps of metal and their weapons aimed directly at Jack and Alara. Well, the leader sneered, his reptilian face twisted into a grin. "Looks like we got some competition." Jack raised his blaster. "We're just here for the crystal. No need to make this messy." The scavenger laughed. "Oh, it's going to be messy, all right. But don't worry, you won't live to see it." Before Jack could respond, Alara stepped forward. Her hands began to glow brighter, and the air around them seemed to vibrate. "Leave," she said, her voice calm but commanding. The scavengers hesitated, their confidence wavering. But the leader snarled, "What are you gonna do, glow us to death?" Alara didn't answer. Instead, she raised her hands, and a wave of energy burst from her palms, slamming into the scavengers and sending them flying. The force shook the ground, and Jack barely managed to stay on his feet. When the dust settled, the scavengers were gone, their bodies scattered across the asteroid's surface. Jack stared at Alara, his jaw slack. "Remind me never to argue with you." She gave him a faint smile but swayed on her feet. Jack caught her before she fell. "Easy," he said. "You don't need to burn yourself out." "I'm fine," she said weakly. Jack nodded and turned back to the crystal. He pulled it from the rock and tucked it into his pack. "Let's get out of here," he said. "Something tells me this isn't over." As they made their way back to the speeder, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The asteroid field was too quiet, too still. And as they flew back toward the city, he knew one thing for sure. Crocs wouldn't let them go that easily. The asteroid ambush. The asteroid field stretched endlessly before them, a chaotic maze of drifting rocks illuminated by the eerie glow of distant stars. Jack tightened his grip on the ship's controls, his knuckles white as he maneuvered through the debris. The faint hum of the engines was the only sound, a fragile calm before the storm. "Are you sure this map is accurate?" Jack asked, glancing at Alara. She sat in the co-pilot's seat, her glowing hands resting on her lap. Alara nodded, her silver hair shimmering in the dim cockpit light. It's leading us to the heart of the field. That's where the treasure is supposed to be. Jack snorted. Of course it is. Why can't the galaxy's secrets ever be somewhere easy? Like a beach. Alara allowed herself a faint smile but quickly grew serious again. This treasure, Crox has been searching for it for years. It must be important. Important enough to send a whole army after us, Jack muttered, adjusting the ship's trajectory. The ship's navigation system began to beep, a warning of incoming objects. Jack leaned forward, squinting at the screen. We're not alone, he said, his voice tense. Alara turned to him. Scavengers. Jack shook his head. Worse. A shadow passed over the cockpit, and Jack's stomach sank. A massive ship, dark and menacing, loomed ahead of them. Its hull was covered in jagged armor, and its weapons glowed ominously. Crox's men, Alara whispered, her glowing eyes narrowing. The comms crackled to life, and a guttural voice filled the cockpit. Human, you've made a big mistake. Hand over the girl and the map, and we might let you live. Jack clenched his jaw, his fingers flying over the controls. Yeah, I'm going to pass on that. The voice growled. Then prepare to die. The massive ship's weapons came to life, and the asteroid field erupted in chaos. Bolts of energy streaked through the void, narrowly missing Jack's ship as he swerved between the drifting rocks. Hold on, Jack shouted, pulling the ship into a sharp dive. Alara gripped the edge of her seat, her glowing hands trembling. We can't outrun them. Jack smirked despite the danger. Who said anything about running? He twisted the ship around a massive asteroid, using its gravity to slingshot them back toward their pursuers. The sudden maneuver caught the enemy off guard, and Jack fired the ship's rear cannons, hitting one of their smaller ships. The explosion lit up the asteroid field, but the larger ship remained unscathed. That just made them angrier, Alara said, her voice tight. Good, Jack replied. Angry people make mistakes. The enemy ship fired again, the blast grazing their hull. Sparks flew in the cockpit, and alarms blared. Shields are down, Alara shouted. Jack cursed under his breath. All right, plan B. Which is? Improvise. He steered the ship toward a dense cluster of asteroids, weaving through the narrow gaps with a skill that surprised even himself. The larger ship couldn't follow as easily, its bulky frame scraping against the rocks. We're losing them, Alara said, a glimmer of hope in her voice. But her relief was short-lived. Another enemy ship, smaller and faster, appeared ahead of them, cutting off their escape. They're everywhere, Alara said, her glowing hands tightening into fists. Jack's mind raced. Can you use your powers? Do something flashy and scary. Alara hesitated. I don't know if I can control it. Not out here. You don't have to control it, Jack said, dodging another blast. You just have to make them think you can. Alara nodded, her hands beginning to glow brighter. She closed her eyes, and the air in the cockpit seemed to hum with energy. The light from her hands intensified, spilling out of the ship and into the surrounding void. For a moment, the asteroid field was bathed in a brilliant, otherworldly glow. The enemy ships faltered, their pilots momentarily blinded by the light. Jack seized the opportunity, pushing the ship's engines to their limit and breaking through the blockade. As the glow faded, Alara slumped in her seat, her breathing shallow. Hey, Jack said, glancing at her. You all right? She nodded weakly. I just need a moment. Jack's relief was short-lived. The comms crackled again, and Crox's voice filled the cockpit. You think you've won, he snarled. This is just the beginning. You can't run forever, human. Jack smirked, flipping the switch to cut the comms. Watch me. The ship soared out of the asteroid field, the enemy ships falling behind. For now, they were safe. But Jack knew Crox wasn't bluffing. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. He glanced at Alara, who was staring out the window, her glowing eyes fixed on the stars. "What now?" she asked softly. Jack set the ship on autopilot and leaned back in his seat. "Now we find this treasure and figure out how to stop Crocs for good." Alara nodded, her determination returning. "Then let's make sure we don't lose." The final confrontation. The safe house was supposed to be impenetrable, a fortress hidden deep beneath the city's underbelly, surrounded by walls of alien metal and cloaked by jamming signals. But as the ground shook violently, Jack realized nothing was safe when Crocs was involved. "What the hell was that?" Jack shouted, gripping the edge of a table as another explosion rocked the room. Rick, the sly alien mechanic who owned the place, peeked out from behind a console. His antennas twitched nervously. "That, my friend, is Crocs, letting us know he's found us. And he's pissed." Jack turned to Alara, who stood at the center of the room, her glowing hands clenched into fists. "How did they find us? You said this place was off the grid." Rick threw up two of his four hands. "It was. Crocs must have tracked the crystal you brought back. That thing isn't just a power source. It's a beacon." Alara's glowing eyes widened. "He's using it to lock onto us. We have to destroy it." Before anyone could respond, the room's entrance blew open, sending shards of metal flying. Smoke poured in, and through the haze, Crocs's massive frame emerged, flanked by his heavily armed thugs. "Ah, there you are," Crocs growled, his red eyes locking onto Alara. "You've caused me a great deal of trouble, girl. It's time to end this." Jack stepped in front of Alara, raising his blaster. "You want her? You'll have to go through me first." Crocs sneered, his sharp teeth glinting in the dim light. "Gladly." The room erupted into chaos. Jack fired his blaster, taking down one of Crocs's goons, while Rick scrambled to activate the safe house's defenses. Panels on the walls slid open, revealing automated turrets that began firing at the intruders. Alara raised her glowing hands, a surge of energy building around her. "Get to cover," she shouted, releasing a wave of light that knocked several thugs off their feet. Crocs, however, was unfazed. He raised a massive gauntlet, which absorbed the energy blast and sent it hurtling back toward Alara. She barely dodged, the force of the counterattack slamming into the wall behind her. "You're going to have to do better than that," Crocs taunted, stepping closer. Jack ducked behind a console, firing wildly at the advancing thugs. "Rick, any time now." "I'm working on it," Rick shouted, frantically typing on a holographic keyboard. The defenses weren't designed for a full-on invasion, you know. Another explosion rocked the room, and the ceiling began to crack. Jack glanced at Alara, who was breathing heavily, her energy dimming. "Alara, you okay?" he called out. She nodded weakly but didn't answer. Jack could see the toll the fight was taking on her. Crocs laughed, his voice echoing through the chaos. "You're running out of tricks, human. Hand her over, and I might let you crawl out of here alive." Jack gritted his teeth. Not happening. Suddenly, Rick shouted, "Got it." The turrets pivoted, their fire concentrating on Crocs. The massive alien raised his gauntlet, deflecting the blasts, but it gave Jack and Alara a moment to regroup. "We can't keep this up," Alara said, her voice barely audible. "He's too strong." Jack glanced at the crystal, still glowing faintly on the table. An idea began to form. What if we use that against him? Alara hesitated. "The crystal is unstable. If we overload it, it'll take out everything." Jack finished, including Crocs. Alara's glowing eyes met his. "And us." Jack shrugged. "Better than letting him win." Alara nodded, her determination returning. "Let's do it." Jack grabbed the crystal and ran toward the center of the room, dodging blaster fire. Crocs noticed him and roared, charging forward. "Jack!" Alara shouted. Jack turned just as Crocs lunged at him. He rolled out of the way, narrowly avoiding the alien's massive claws. Alara, Now, he shouted, tossing the crystal toward her. Alara caught it and closed her hands around it, her energy pouring into the glowing object. The room began to shake violently, the air crackling with raw power. Crox's red eyes widened. "What are you doing?" "Ending this," Alara said, her voice steady. The crystal pulsed brighter and brighter, its light blinding. Crox roared, lunging toward Alara, but Jack tackled him, holding him back with every ounce of strength he had. "Do it," Jack shouted. Alara unleashed the crystal's energy, a brilliant explosion of light consuming the room. When Jack opened his eyes, everything was silent. The room was in ruins, smoke and debris filling the air. He coughed, pushing himself to his feet. "Alara," he called out, his voice hoarse. A faint glow caught his eye. Alara lay a few feet away, her body surrounded by a soft, flickering light. He rushed to her side, his heart pounding. "Hey," he said, gently shaking her. "Wake up." Her eyes fluttered open, and she gave him a weak smile. "Did we win?" Jack laughed, relief washing over him. "Yeah, we won." Rick stumbled out from behind a pile of rubble, covered in soot but alive. "You two are insane," he said, coughing. Jack grinned. "And you love it." Alara sat up slowly, her energy returning. "Crox." Jack glanced around. There was no sign of the crime lord, just a scorch mark where he had stood. "He's gone," Jack said. "For good, I hope." Alara nodded, her glowing eyes softening. "Thank you, Jack." Jack helped her to her feet. "Don't thank me yet. We've still got a long way to go." As they stepped out of the ruined safe house and into the city's dim light, Jack couldn't help but smile. For the first time in a long while, he felt like they had a chance. Freedom at a price. The ship drifted through the quiet expanse of space, its engines humming softly. The scars from the battle on the asteroid and the safehouse siege were visible along the hull, burn marks, dents, and missing panels. Jack sat in the pilot's seat, his fingers tapping nervously against the controls. His usual cocky demeanor was gone, replaced by a weighty silence. Behind him, Alara rested on a cot, her glowing skin flickering like a candle in the dark. She was recovering from the energy she had unleashed during the fight with Crox, but the cost of that power was written all over her face. "You should be resting," Jack said without turning around. Alara's voice was soft but steady. "I'll rest when we're safe." Jack glanced at her over his shoulder. Her glowing eyes, though dimmer now, still held the same fierce determination that had carried them this far. "We're safe enough for now," he said. "But you're right. Crox's goons might still be out there." Alara sat up, wincing slightly. "Not just them. That crystal. It was more than just a power source. I felt something when I used it, something bigger than Crox. Whoever, or whatever, it belonged to won't stop looking for it." Jack sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "So we've traded one enemy for another. Great." Alara stood and moved toward the cockpit, steadying herself against the wall as she walked. She looked out at the stars, her glowing skin reflecting faintly on the glass. "Jack, you don't have to stay with me. You've already done more than anyone ever has. If you want to leave, I'll understand." Jack turned to her, his expression incredulous. "Leave? After all we've been through? Are you kidding me?" She met his gaze, her glowing eyes searching his. "You've risked everything for me. I don't want to drag you into more danger." Jack leaned back in his seat, crossing his arms. "Look, Alara, I'm not the kind of guy who walks away when things get tough. And besides, you're not dragging me into danger. I walked in willingly. Call me stubborn or stupid, but I don't back down." A faint smile tugged at Alara's lips. "Stubborn, definitely." Jack chuckled, but the moment of levity was cut short as the ship's proximity alarms began to blare. "Aw, come on," Jack groaned, spinning back to the controls. "What now?" The radar screen lit up with a cluster of blips heading straight for them. Ships, fast, heavily armed, and closing in quickly. That doesn't look like Crox's crew, Jack said, narrowing his eyes. Alara's face turned pale. No, it's worse. Those ships, they belong to the Syndicate. Jack's stomach dropped. The Syndicate was a shadowy organization that controlled half the galaxy's criminal underworld. If they were involved, things were about to get a whole lot messier. Why are they after us? Jack asked, frantically flipping switches to prepare the ship for evasive maneuvers. Alara's voice was calm but grim. The crystal wasn't just energy, it was a key. The Syndicate's been hunting for it for centuries, and now they think we know where it leads. Jack groaned. Great, so we're not just running from a crime boss anymore. We're running from the most dangerous organization in the galaxy. Fantastic. The first shots fired, streaks of red and blue energy zipping past the ship. Jack pulled the controls hard, the ship twisting and diving through space. Alara, I could use some of that magic of yours right about now, Jack said, gritting his teeth. I'm not at full strength, she replied, her voice strained. But I'll do what I can. Alara placed her hands on the console, her glowing energy spreading across the controls. The ship's systems flared to life, responding faster and more fluidly than Jack had ever seen. Okay, that's new, he said, steering the ship into a tight loop to evade another volley of fire. The Syndicate ships closed in, their weapons hammering at the ship's shields. Jack cursed under his breath. We can't outfight them, not in this rust bucket. Alara's glowing eyes sharpened. We don't have to fight. We just need to disappear. Jack glanced at her. Disappear? How? She closed her eyes, her energy surging. The lights in the cockpit flickered as the ship began to hum with an otherworldly resonance. Hold on, Alara whispered. The ship suddenly veered off course, diving toward a nearby nebula. The Syndicate ships followed, their weapons blazing. As they entered the nebula, the swirling gases enveloped the ship, and the radar went dark. Jack could barely see through the thick, glowing clouds. What's your plan here? Jack asked, his voice tense. Alara didn't answer. Instead, she raised her hands, and the ship's energy output surged. The nebula around them seemed to react, glowing brighter and pulsing in time with Alara's energy. The Syndicate ships entered the nebula, their forms barely visible through the haze. But as they closed in, the nebula erupted in a blinding flash of light. When the light faded, the Syndicate ships were gone, and the radar was clear. Jack stared at Alara, his mouth open. What? What just happened? Alara sank into the co-pilot's seat, her energy dimming. I tapped into the nebula's energy. It disrupted their systems and scattered them across light years. They won't find us for a while. Jack shook his head in disbelief. You're full of surprises, you know that. Alara smiled faintly. I'm starting to learn that myself. Jack leaned back, exhaling deeply. So, where to now? Alara's glowing eyes turned toward the stars. The key leads somewhere. If we can find out where, we might have a chance to stop the Syndicate and anyone else before they come after us again. Jack grinned, his confidence returning. An ancient mystery, a powerful key, and half the galaxy chasing us. Sounds like my kind of adventure. As the ship soared into the unknown, the stars ahead seemed brighter, full of possibilities and dangers yet to come.